The wolves knew before anyone spoke. It was the way their heads lifted, all at once, like a field of iron filings reorienting toward an invisible magnet. Soldiers along the fortress wall, servants in the courtyard. Even the war horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, ears rotating, nostrils flaring. Solveig Ashvane felt none of it. She was too cold to feel much of anything. She stood at the edge of the frozen courtyard of Vordheim Keep, her wool cloak soaked through at the hem from the 6-hour journey through sleet, her fingers inside her mittens curled so tight they had gone numb. Beside her, her brother Finn was pretending not to shiver, which was unconvincing given that his teeth were audibly clicking together. "We should have sent word ahead," he muttered from the side of his mouth. "We did send word ahead," Solveig said quietly. 3 days ago. "Then, where is Father's contact?" She said nothing, because she had no answer. Lord Brennan Ashvane's contact in Vordheim had either never received the message, or had received it and chosen not to appear. The difference mattered enormously, and she had been running calculations on it for the last 2 hours of riding through the grey Nordic dark. Their father was in debt, not the gentle, embarrassing kind, but the kind that ended in confiscations and worse. He had sent his 2 eldest children to Vordheim as minor supplicants, bearing a chest of their mother's jewelry and a letter requesting audience with the Alpha King's steward. Not the king himself. They were not so deluded as to aim that high. Just the steward. Just enough to renegotiate. The chest of jewelry sat in the cart behind them. It was worth, Solveig had privately estimated, perhaps 1/3 of what they actually owed. She inhaled slowly. The air tasted of forge smoke and pine resin, and the iron bite of coming snow. Vordheim Keep loomed above them. Not beautiful exactly, but so enormous it seemed to generate its own gravity. Black stone walls that had stood for 400 years. Towers like raised fists. The great wolf standard snapping in the wind, its silver threads catching the last grey light of afternoon. "Gates opening," Finn said. It was, but not because of them. The heavy oaken iron gate swung inward with a groan that Solveig felt in her chest, and through it came horses, 6 of them, huge dark animals moving with the purposeful quiet of creatures that had been trained to kill. Their riders were soldiers, grey cloaks over scale armor, the Vordheim wolf sigil on their chest plate, and behind the soldiers, on a horse that was almost supernaturally still despite the sleet and the cold, was a man. Solveig had a single impression before she dropped her eyes to the ground, as was correct for an Omega in the presence of a high-ranking Alpha. Tall, very tall, dark. Then the scent hit her. She had been told about Alpha scent. Every Omega was. Maren, the healer who had guided Solveig through her first presentation, had described it matter-of-factly, musk and cedar and something that gets into the back of your throat and makes you forget your own name, child. Don't breathe too deep. Solveig had been careful, always. She knew how to shallow breathe when alphas were near, how to keep her face politely neutral, how to be simply present without being noticed. But she had never been this close to an Alpha King before. The scent was nothing like musk. It was, she scrambled for the right word and found none. It was winter lightning, and the moment before a storm breaks, when the pressure drops, and the air changes and your skin knows something enormous is coming before your mind does. It went into her lungs like cold water. Her fingers uncurled inside her mittens without her telling them to. Breathe shallow, she reminded herself. Eyes down. Do not be noticed. Too late. The horse had stopped. She felt it before she saw it, the specific quality of attention when a high predator focuses on you. The hairs on the back of her neck rose in a single, slow wave. You. The voice was low, unhurried. It carried the way that voices did when they had never once needed to be raised. Omega, look up. She had been trained to obey that particular tone since childhood. Her chin came up before the decision fully formed. The Alpha King of Vordheim was looking at her. She had thought from her one fractional glance that he was dark. He was more than dark. He was the kind of striking that was almost architectural. Features so sharply defined, they seemed hewn rather than born. Black hair plastered against his forehead by the sleet. Grey-black eyes that held no warmth and no cruelty. Just an absolute measuring stillness. Those eyes were fixed on her face with an expression she could not read. She did not look away, because he had told her not to, and also because for 3 full seconds she seemed to have misplaced the ability to move. "What is your name?" he said. "Solveig Ashvan, my lord." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Of the Ashvane holding, my brother and I have come to request audience with your steward regarding—" "Ashvane." He repeated it like he was tasting it. His gaze moved over her face with a slow, methodical attention that was somehow more unnerving than any open aggression would have been. "You are far from your holding." "Yes, my lord." "In Sleet, without adequate escort." She became acutely aware, suddenly, of how she must look. Cloak soaked through, hair beginning to escape from its braid in the wet, cheeks almost certainly raw from the cold. "We encountered some delay on the road," she said, which was a polished way of saying we were turned away from 2 inns and our escort's horse went lame. Something moved briefly at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "Wolf?" He spoke without turning his head. The second in command brought his horse forward. He was a bear of a man with a grey-streaked beard, and he looked at Solveig with the frank, assessing gaze of someone taking inventory. "My lord?" "House them in the east wing." A pause. "Properly." "Properly." Wolf's eyebrows went up a 1/4 inch, enough to tell Solveig that properly was not the default instruction. He recovered immediately. "Yes, my lord." The Alpha King looked at her for one more moment, that same unreadable, measuring stillness, and then he rode through the gate. Solveig stood in the sleet and breathed. "Don't breathe too deep," Marin had said. She had breathed too deep. The east wing was warm. This seemed like such a small thing until you had spent 6 hours in Nordic sleet and then entered a corridor where actual fire burned in iron sconces every 10 feet, where the rushes on the floor were fresh and clean-smelling, where a servant appeared with towels and hot water, and a speed that suggested they had been expecting exactly this. Solveig stood in the center of a bedchamber that was larger than her father's entire hall, and tried to recalibrate. "The king himself assigned us rooms," Finn said from the doorway. He said it quietly, which meant he was genuinely impressed and slightly alarmed. Finn used his loud voice for most things. His quiet voice was for the things he didn't know how to process yet. "Why did the king himself assign us rooms?" "I don't know." "Did something happen in the courtyard?" "I was looking at the gate." "Nothing happened." Finn looked at her the way he had looked at her since they were children, that particular sidelong study that meant he knew she was lying but had decided not to push it yet. "The servant said dinner is in the great hall at sundown. We're included." "That's... Damen." She stopped. "That's unusual." "That's what I thought." He paused. "Solveig, what's happening?" She pressed her cold hands against her cheeks and felt the warmth of the room slowly beginning to reach her. "I genuinely don't know," she said, and this time it was the truth. But we should be very careful. The Great Hall of Wardheim Keep was the kind of room that made you understand, viscerally, what it meant to hold power across generations. The ceiling was lost in shadow and smoke. The long tables were crowded with soldiers, knights, minor nobles, the full retinue of a wartime king who had not, at the moment, a war to fight, and was visibly restless about it. The noise was enormous. The food was abundant. The smell of roasting meat and pine and spilled ale was almost aggressively alive. Solveig and Finn were seated. By Wolf's specific instruction, she noted, at the far end of the left table, close enough to the warmth of the central fire to be comfortable, far enough from the high table to be inconspicuous. She did not look at the high table. She lasted approximately 4 minutes before she looked at the high table. The Alpha King sat at its center, flanked by advisors and knights, and he was not looking at her. He was talking with the man on his left. Something administrative from the body language, and his attention was entirely elsewhere, and she felt a ridiculous, disproportionate relief about this, which immediately embarrassed her. Lady Astrid Geld materialized at her elbow with the particular grace of a woman who has practiced arriving places unexpectedly. "You're the Ashvane girl," she said. She made it sound like an accusation. Solveig met her gaze. Astrid Geld was beautiful in the specific way that reminded you beauty could be a weapon. Cheekbones engineered for intimidation. A mouth that smiled while her eyes measured distance. She was beta, which meant she had spent her whole life carving status from a world that handed it to alphas automatically, and you could see the sharpness that had developed along every edge of her. "I am," Solveig said. "You're Lady Astrid Geld. I've heard of your family." A flicker of surprise, quickly smoothed. "Have you? What did you hear?" "That you advised the king on trade relations with the southern holds." A pause. "That you're very good at it." The smile that crossed Astrid's face was genuine for exactly half a second before it became calculated again. She studied Solveig with new attention. "You're more than you look," she said, which was almost a compliment. "Most people are," Solveig said pleasantly. Astrid looked at her for a long moment. Then she glanced at the high table. A quick, sharp look, and something shifted in her expression that Solveig couldn't name. "A word of advice," she said quietly, leaning slightly closer. "Don't become interesting to him. It isn't good for you." She moved away before Solveig could respond. Solveig turned back to her food and found, with some frustration, that she was not hungry anymore. The steward's audience was granted the following morning. Solveig had prepared. She had spread her father's ledgers across the writing table at the first grey light, cross-referenced the numbers she had memorized against the letter's terms, and constructed what she believed was a reasonable proposal. Restructured debt repayment across 4 harvest seasons, with the Ashvane timber rights as collateral rather than the land itself. She had not prepared for the steward's first words, which were, "The Alpha King will hear this himself." Silence. Pardon," Finn said. "His Majesty has expressed personal interest in the Ashvane petition." The steward was a thin, precise man who delivered impossible information with the calm of someone reading weather reports. "He will receive you in the map room, now, if you're prepared." They were not prepared. They went anyway. The map room was exactly what it sounded like, a long chamber whose walls were covered entirely in maps, some of them so old the vellum had gone amber, some newer and annotated in sharp black ink that Solveig suspected was the king's own hand. There was a great table at the center covered in correspondence and miniature wooden markers. The fire here was smaller, more functional. No performance in this room. This was where the actual work happened. Calder Fordrick stood at the far wall with his back to them, studying a map of the northern coast. He did not turn when they entered. Solveig breathed carefully through her mouth. "The Ashvane Holding," he said, still not turning. "East of the Greyvast River. Pine Forest to the north, 2 viable trade roads south." He turned then, and his grey-black eyes moved to her face with the same directness as the night before. "Your father sent his children instead of coming himself." "My father's health prevents long travel at this season, my lord," she said. "That is one explanation." He moved to the table and picked up a document she recognized as her father's letter. He read it, or appeared to read it. She suspected he had already read it multiple times. "Your proposal is reasonable. The timber rights are worth approximately what the debt requires." He set the letter down. "I have a different offer." She waited. "The Ashvane debt is cleared," he said. "Entirely. In exchange, you remain in Vordheim for 1 season as a member of my household, as an Omega of negotiable rank, not a servant, not a hostage." He met her eyes. "An arrangement?" The silence stretched. "An arrangement," Finn repeated, and his voice had gone very flat. Solveig put her hand on his arm without looking at him. "May I ask what purpose I would serve?" she said. Her voice was steady. She was distantly proud of this. "My court has been without a senior Omega presence for 2 years, Calder said. "There are functions, mediations, certain ceremonies that require one. You would fulfill that role." He paused. "Nothing else is implied or required." She looked at him. He looked back at her. The map room was very quiet. The problem was this. She didn't believe it was only that. The problem was also this. She couldn't see a lie in his face, and she had become, through necessity, very good at reading faces. "My brother returns home," she said. "Yes. I would need access to paper and courier service to write to my family." "Granted. And if I find the arrangement untenable after 1 month, I leave without penalty to my family." Something moved in his expression, very slight, like a stone shifting at the bottom of clear water. 1 month, he agreed. She inclined her head. "Then I accept." Finn grabbed her arm the moment they stepped into the corridor. "Solveig." "I know." She turned to face him. He looked like he had when they were small, and she had done something alarming, which had been fairly frequently. "Finn, listen to me. Father's debt is not the kind that restructures. We both know this. This clears it entirely. He wants something. Everyone wants something. He wants you." "He wants an Omega who can handle court functions," she said firmly. "Which is a real requirement. I've read about the Vordheim succession crisis. His mother died 2 years ago. She was the senior Omega presence. There are ceremonies that require it." She met his eyes. "I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" Finn said, not as a question. She hugged him, quickly, fiercely, in the way that they had since childhood, the way that said, "I love you, and I'm not discussing this further," and then she let him go. She was not certain she knew what she was doing. But the debt was real, and the offer was real, and the Alpha King's grey-black eyes, when he looked at her, were... She pushed that thought down firmly and did not look at it. A keep was an ecosystem. You understood this if you had lived in one. Gossip moved faster than fire, silently, through kitchen passages and servant corridors, and the narrow stairs between floors that only the long-term inhabitants knew about. By the evening of Solveig's 2nd full day in Vordheim, everyone knew she was there. By the 3rd day, they had formed opinions. The soldiers on the whole were indifferent. She was not a military matter. The servants were carefully, watchfully polite. She had been placed in the East Wing, which was information, and she had been granted Omega household rank, which was more information, and the Alpha King had looked at her in the courtyard, which was apparently information enough to fuel speculation for weeks. Lady Astrid Gelt's opinion was not difficult to identify. It lived in the specific quality of silence that appeared whenever Solveig entered a room that Astrid was already occupying. Wolf was harder to read. He showed her the keep with the methodical efficiency of a man performing a task he had been given, naming halls and functions and protocols without embellishment. But on the second day, as they passed the library, which was larger than it had any right to be, for a military stronghold, he paused. "You noticed the annotation on the northern coast map," he said. It wasn't a question. She had noticed. She had not mentioned it. The harbor depth markings were updated recently. The older ones showed a different current pattern. Wolf looked at her. Then he opened the library door. "His Majesty updates them himself," he said. "Most people don't notice." She stepped inside. The library smelled of old vellum and pine resin and tallow candles, and the particular dusty weight of centuries. She walked along the shelves slowly. Navigation, charts, genealogies, histories in 3 languages, law texts, an entire section of what appeared to be philosophical treatises, which surprised her. "He reads," she said, and immediately felt foolish. But Wolf said, simply, "He reads everything." And there was something in his voice that was not professional detachment, something closer to how you spoke about a person you had watched grow up and had ended up respecting in spite of yourself. She thought about the map room, the annotations, the sharp, abbreviated handwriting that she had catalogued without meaning to. She stopped thinking about it with some effort. The ceremony she was required to assist with came on the 7th day. The blessing of the borders, a ritual in which the senior Omega of the household walked the keep's interior boundary at dawn and scent, marked the threshold. An ancient protection rite, Tot. It required an Omega who had been in residence long enough to be considered of the house. 7 days was the threshold. Barely. Maren had taught her the ritual. She had expected to perform it alone, with perhaps a junior priest for guidance. Calder was waiting at the east door. She stopped when she saw him. He was in plain clothes, no armor, no formal wolf cloak, just a dark tunic and leather breeches, his dark hair loose rather than braided back. He looked, for the first time, like a person rather than a title. "You don't need to be here for this," she said. "I'm aware." She waited for an explanation. He didn't offer one. He simply fell into step beside her when she began, half a pace behind and to her left, the traditional position of a paired alpha in this ritual, which had not been filled in 2 years. She knew what it meant. It meant protected, witnessed, claimed by the house. She knew what it did not mean, which was anything personal. It was protocol. She walked the boundary. He walked it with her. Their breath fogged in the early cold. The keep woke around them. The first sound of the kitchens, a distant horse, the changing of the night watch. At each threshold she pressed her palm briefly to the wood and felt the old instinct rise. Mine, safe, here. The ritual scent that Omegas could produce in ceremony, calming, grounding, rose without her having to summon it. She felt him, behind and beside her, very still. At the last threshold, the great north door, iron-banded oak, facing into the grey Nordic dawn. She turned to complete the ritual and found him closer than she had realized. close enough that she could see the individual texture of his jaw, the way the cold had brought the faintest color into the angular line of his cheekbones. The ritual required a spoken confirmation. She said the words in Old Norse, as Maren had taught her. Her voice was steady. Her hands, hidden in the folds of her cloak, were not. He repeated the answering phrase. His voice was very quiet, lower than usual. She felt it more than heard it, a resonance in the sternum, like a note struck on a string instrument that was already vibrating. The silence afterward lasted exactly 2 seconds longer than it should have. She stepped back. He let her. "The ritual is complete," she said. "Professional, appropriate." "Yes," he said. Neither of them moved for another second. Then he turned and walked back toward the keep's interior, and she stood in the north door's threshold, with the dawn air cold on her face, and her heart doing something she could not entirely account for. He's never walked the boundary before. Solveig was in the still room, helping Maren, who was the keep's Omega healer, and had, without formal announcement, adopted Solveig as her assistant, prepare the winter stores of dried herbs. It was the most comfortable she had felt in days. The smell of rosemary and dried pine needles was uncomplicated in a way that the rest of the keep was not. "The boundary ritual?" she said, measuring dried yarrow into a clay jar. In 2 years, since his mother died, Maren's hands moved with the automatic precision of decades of practice. She was very old, her face deeply lined, her eyes sharp as a hawk. He sent a junior beta to walk it alone, both years. A pause. "He walked it with you." Solveig set down the yarrow. "It was protocol." "Protocol is what you make it." Maren glanced at her sideways. "You felt it, didn't you? The pull." "I don't know what you mean." "Child," Maren said, with the gentle patience of someone who has said the same thing many times to many young amigas, "I am old, and my knees hurt, and I don't have time to be subtle. He is your mate." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into water. Solveig watched the ripples. "That is not," she said carefully, "necessarily true. Your scent changed when he walked in on the first evening. I was in the corridor. I smelled it." Maren stoppered the clay jar. "He knows. He knew before you did, probably. Alphas always do." "He hasn't said anything." "Of course he hasn't. He's called her Vordret." Maren said the name with a mixture of exasperation and complicated respect that seemed to be the default response among the people who knew him best. That man would walk into a burning building and not mention the smoke. Solveig was quiet for a moment. "Is that why he offered the arrangement? To have time?" Maren glanced at her again. "He couldn't claim a mate by fiat. Even an alpha king. You'd have to come to it willingly. So he found a reason to keep you here." She paused. "Whether it becomes more than an arrangement is entirely up to you." Solveig sat with this. Outside, sleet tapped against the shuttered windows. The herbs smelled of old summers. "What if I don't want a mate?" she said. "That," said Maren, "is absolutely your right." A pause. "But ask yourself whether what you're feeling right now is not wanting it, or being afraid of it." Solveig did not answer this. She did not answer it because she did not know the answer, which was in itself an answer of a kind. It was not supposed to snow so early in the season. Fordheim's stable master said so, with feeling, as Solveig helped evacuate the youngest horses from the flooding paddock in the blizzard's sudden fury. She was not supposed to be out here. She had simply been closest to the stable when the alert came, and she had gone without thinking, because the sound of a frightened horse was not a sound she could sit still through. The young grey gelding, barely trained, wide-eyed with terror, went sideways into her as a lightning crack shook the sky, and the world tilted, and the paddock fence arrived with more force than anticipated. She sat up in the snow, with her left hand pressed to her head and blood on her fingers. "Don't move." The voice came from directly above her. She looked up and found the Alpha King crouched at her side, also not supposed to be here, in the middle of a storm, in the stable yard, his dark hair soaked through, his expression doing something complicated that she didn't have enough functioning brain cells to pass correctly. "I'm fine," she said, because she was trained to say this. "You're bleeding." "It's a minor." She tried to stand, and the world tilted again in a way that was not the storm. His hand caught her elbow. The grip was light, careful in a way that surprised her. She registered with some detachment. His hands are warm. She had expected cold. He had always seemed so cold. She registered with less detachment. He's not letting go. He got her inside, not the main keep, the nearer stable building, where there was a fire and a lamp and Wolf already arriving with a medical kit, because of course Wolf always arrived. Solveig was sat on a hay bale. The cut was inspected. It was in fact minor, more blood than damage, which was the scalp's particular gift, but required cleaning and a bandage. Wolf handed the medical kit to the Alpha King. The Alpha King took it. She looked up at him. He crouched in front of her, the kit open across his knee, and met her eyes briefly before his attention moved to the cut. "Hold still," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." She held still. His fingers were careful in a way that did not match anything else about him. She watched his face as he worked. The focused quiet, the absence of impatience, the small, precise movement. He had good hands. She had not noticed this before. She noticed it now with an intensity that was embarrassing. He cleaned the cut. She felt the sting and controlled her reaction. He watched her control her reaction, and something shifted briefly in his expression. Something she thought might be respect. "You went out there for the horses," he said. "Not a question." "I was closest." "You're a mega-ranked household. That's not your duty." "It wasn't a duty calculation," she said honestly. He was wrapping the bandage now, his fingers moving in careful loops around her head. She could see the line of his jaw from this angle, the slight tension in it. She could smell the storm and leather and that other thing. Lightning, winter, the held breath before everything changes. She remembered what Marin had said. He knows. "May I ask you something?" she said. He tied the bandage. Did not step back. "You may." "Why did you really offer the arrangement?" The stable was very quiet. The storm shook the roof. The fire snapped. He looked at her for a long moment with those gray-black eyes. Something was moving in them. She could see it, like weather behind glass. He did not answer for long enough that she thought he wouldn't. "You smelled like winter," he said, "and something warm underneath." A pause. "I couldn't let you leave before I understood it." Her breath caught. He stood, all the way up, the distance returning, the Alpha King reassembling around him like a coat being shrugged on. He handed the remaining bandage to Wolf with the air of a man who had said nothing unusual. "Don't go out in blizzards," he said to her without looking back. She sat on the hay bale and listened to the storm and thought, Oh, that's what this is." Winter deepened. Solveig learned the rhythms of Vordheim the way you learned a new language. First the shapes of words, then their meanings, then one morning you realized you were thinking it. The keep had a logic that took weeks to understand. Which corridors turned cold in what winds, which servants were to be trusted with information, and which were Astrid Geld's informants, which of the Alpha King's moods indicated genuine displeasure versus the kind of silence that simply meant he was thinking. She was learning the silences. There were the operational silences, clipped and vertical, when he was managing something complex. There were the reading silences, when his face went completely still and only his eyes moved. And there was another kind, rarer, that she had only begun to recognize in the last 2 weeks, when he was near her and simply quiet, the way a person was quiet near something they didn't want to disturb. She had caught him watching her 3 times. He had not looked away any of those times. She had been the one to look away, her cheeks warm, her pulse doing something involuntary and inconvenient. The court noticed. Courts always noticed. Astrid cornered her in the linen corridor one afternoon with the precision of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. "He has looked at you 4 times during the midday meal for the past week," she said. No preamble. "I hadn't noticed," Solveig said, which was technically true in the sense that she had been counting 2, and 4 was an undercount. Astrid studied her. The calculation in her face was less hostile than it had been in the first week, replaced by something that looked, reluctantly, like assessment. "You're smarter than I assumed," she said. "You assumed something specific." "I assumed you were a pretty omega from a failing house who'd caught a powerful man's eye and would blunder through the consequences." A pause. "I'm revising that." Solveig waited. "He doesn't look at people," Astrid said. It came out flatter than the other words, stripped of performance, which told Solveig it was true. "He manages people. He uses people, efficiently and without cruelty, which is the best version of power you'll find. But he doesn't—" She stopped. Started again. "I've been in his court for 3 years. He has never looked at anyone the way he looks at you." The linen corridor was cold and smelled of clean wool. Solveig kept her face still. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I don't want to watch you waste it." Astrid said it like it cost her something. "Whatever it is you're doing, the careful distance, the professional composure." Her mouth twisted slightly. "He'll wait. He's very patient when he wants something, but you should know what you're waiting out before you decide whether to keep doing it." She walked away. Solveig stood in the linen corridor for some time. That evening, for the first time, she sat at the high table. She had been placed there by Wolf, technically within protocol, as her household rank had quietly been elevated sometime in the past 10 days, which she had noticed and not commented on. She sat 3 places from the Alpha King, which was close enough to feel the particular gravitational field of his presence, and far enough to maintain the fiction that this was entirely ordinary. They did not speak across the table. They rarely spoke directly, in public. But at some point in the middle of the meal, when the noise was loudest, she reached for the water pitcher at the same moment he did. Their hands stopped an inch apart. She looked up. He was already looking at her. The noise of the hall continued around them, oblivious, enormous. In the middle of it, a silence shaped exactly like the 2 of them. He moved his hand back. "Let her pour." She poured, and her hand was completely steady, and she was privately astonished by this. It came, as these things do, at the worst possible moment. The Midwinter Council brought the minor lords of the northern holdings to Vordheim for 3 days of administration, treaty renewal, and the kind of political maneuvering that Solveig had watched from the sidelines and found exhausting in its specific variety of pettiness. She stayed to the edges, performed her household functions, kept her face politely neutral. On the second evening, a lord she had never met, heavy-set, red-faced, the lord of a hold 2 days east, stood at the feast and raised his cup toward the high table with the exaggerated enthusiasm of someone who had been drinking since noon. "To the Alpha King," he said. "And what is she? His Kleptomega?" He grinned. The grin had the specific unpleasantness of a man testing how much he could say. "They say she's been here since the first snow. 3 months. A pause that was not quite a pause. Some arrangements last longer than expected." The hall went quiet. Not completely. It was a large room. But the nearest tables, yes. Solveig set down her cup. Her face did not change. "She's from the Ashvane holding," someone said, in the tone of someone trying to diffuse things. "A debt." A debt cleared in 3 months? The red-faced lord was enjoying himself. For a minor timber hold? Generous terms. Very generous. He let the implication sit there. From the high table, the Alpha King's voice came out with a complete and total lack of heat that was somehow more frightening than anger. "Lord Breckerton." The man's grin wavered. "Sit down." He sat. The feast resumed. Around Solveig, people's eyes slid carefully sideways. That practiced courtesy of court, the performed non-witnessing of things you had absolutely witnessed. She did not look at the high table. She ate the rest of her meal with precision and left at the first appropriate moment. She was in the corridor when she heard his footsteps behind her. "Solveig, turn." She stopped, turned. He was alone. No wolf, no escort, which she had never seen before. He looked, in the corridor light, like the version of him she had seen in the stable. Not the title, but the man. "I'm not embarrassed by the association," she said, before he could speak. "If that's what you came to say." Something shifted in his expression. "That's not what I came to say." "What did you come to say?" He stood in the corridor for a moment that felt very long. "That you handled it correctly," he said, "and that I should have." He stopped. "I should have defined your position more formally, from the beginning, to prevent exactly that." "It wouldn't have prevented it entirely. The implication is always available to anyone who wants to use it." She looked at him. "I know what people assume. I knew when I accepted the arrangement." "And it doesn't." He seemed to be searching for a word he didn't entirely have. "It doesn't bother you." "What bothers me," she said quietly, "is when the assumption is inaccurate and I can't correct it. But in this case," she stopped. "In this case," he prompted. His voice was very careful. "In this case, I'm not entirely certain what the truth is," she said, "so I can't correct it." The corridor was very still. "What would you need," he said, "to be certain?" She looked at him for a long time. Those gray-black eyes, the stone-still expression, the held quality of him, the careful way he was not moving. "Time," she said. "I would need time." "You have it," he said, and something in the words was not just the words, was the thing that lived under the words, that she had been hearing for weeks without acknowledging it. She nodded once. She went to her room. She lay awake for a long time and felt the thing Marin had named, quiet and enormous and warming, the way a fire warms a stone, slowly, from the outside in. It was Wolf who found out about Finn first. He came to her 2 days after the Midwinter Council, in the early morning, with the particular expression of a man delivering news he would rather not be delivering. "A message from your holding," he said. He handed her the letter. She read it. Her face did not move. "When did this arrive?" she asked. Last night, His Majesty. Wolf paused. He has already seen it. The letter was from her father's steward, not her father. This was the first bad sign. The second was the handwriting, hasty, smeared, the kind of writing you did when your hand was shaking. Finn had gone south to visit a merchant cousin. On the road, he'd been taken by agents of the Lord of Grayfen, who held a secondary claim on the Ashvane debt that Solveig had not known about, a claim that predated their arrangement with Calder. They were holding Finn as surety. She put the letter down on the table with extreme care. "I need to leave," she said. "I know," Wolf said. "His Majesty is in the map room." She went to the map room. Calder was at the table, and the moment she came through the door she saw that the northern coast map had been replaced with one of the southern holds, and that 3 of the wooden markers had already been moved. He had not waited for her to ask. He had already begun. "Grayfen's claim is fraudulent," he said, without looking up from the map. "The secondary debt was discharged 6 years ago. He's hoping your father doesn't have the documentation, which he probably doesn't." "Can you prove it?" "I already sent a rider to the archive at Halvan." He looked up. His eyes met hers directly. "We have the documentation by dawn tomorrow. Meanwhile," he moved one of the markers, "I've sent 2 riders south. Fast horses. They'll reach Grayfen's Hole before evening if the roads are clear." She stood in the doorway and felt something fracture, very quietly, in the careful structure she had been maintaining. The professional distance. The appropriate caution. The sensible management of a situation she had not chosen. "You did all this before I came in," she said. "I saw the letter last night." "You didn't have to." Solveig. Her name in his mouth was... It was different from how he usually said it, which was already different from how anyone else said it. It was quiet and direct, and without any of the formal wrapping. "He's your brother." She had been raised to be composed. She had practiced composure in harder circumstances than this. She stood in the doorway and breathed through her nose and did not cry, which was the correct response to this situation. His expression, she looked at him properly, the way she had been careful not to in public, was something she had never seen on it before. The measuring stillness was still there, but underneath it, like light through stone, was something much less controlled, something that looked almost like urgency. "Come look at the map," he said. "Tell me if you see anything I've missed." She crossed the room. She stood at the table beside him and looked at the map and told him 3 things she noticed that he had not marked. He made marks. Their shoulders were close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through her sleeve. Neither of them moved away. Finn came home 5 days later. He arrived looking rattled and cold and furious in the specific way of someone who has had time to construct very thorough anger during a long journey. He had, apparently, spent approximately 6 hours trying to argue with his captors on legal grounds, which had not worked but had impressed at least one guard sufficiently that the man had taught him a dice game to pass the time. He saw Solveig first, in the courtyard, and hugged her with the force of someone who has recently been reminded of their own mortality. Then he held her at arm's length and looked at her face and said, "What happened while I was gone?" "Nothing," she said. "Your eyes are different." "They're not." "Solveig, I've known you for 20 years. Your eyes are different." She had no good response to this. Fortunately, Wolf arrived to escort Finn to his rooms before the conversation could progress further. The resolution of the Grayfen matter was swift, comprehensive, and possessed of a quiet finality that Solveig was beginning to recognize as characteristic. Calder did not make noise about things. He simply made them resolve. The fraudulent claim was documented and formally withdrawn. Lord Grayfen received a letter from the Alpha King that Wolf described with commendable understatement, as direct. No reprisal was announced. She asked him about that. They were in the library. She had taken to the library in the evenings, and he had taken to appearing there with paperwork, and neither of them had yet formally acknowledged that this was a pattern they were both creating. He was reading at the far table. She was restacking a navigation chart section that had been filed in the wrong order. "You didn't announce a consequence for Grayfin," she said. "He doesn't need an announcement. He knows what he did, and that I know, and that his claim is gone. That's sufficient. He'll do it to someone else, someone without your intervention." He looked up from his papers. "You think I should have made an example?" "I think," she chose her words carefully, "I think visible consequences protect people you're not there to protect." He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said simply. She blinked. She had not expected this. "I'll have the ruling published through the court record," he said. "It won't name Grayfin directly, but the precedent will be clear." He paused. "You should have been in the council." "I'm not council rank." "You're arguing policy with me at the 10th hour past sundown," he said. "I'd say the distinction is formalities." She looked at him. He was almost smiling. That barely there movement at the corner of his mouth, the one she had catalogued exactly 4 times. Something warm moved through her, unhurried, deep. "Formalities matter," she said. "To some people." "Do they matter to you?" She thought about this honestly. "Less than they used to," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked back at his papers, but the almost smile was still there, and she turned back to the navigation charts, and the library was warm and quiet around them. She woke in the deep of a winter night to silence. This was wrong. Fordheim was never fully silent. There were always watches, always some sound from the yard or the kitchens or the upper floor. The quality of this silence was different. Too complete. The kind that happened when snow was falling thick enough to muffle the world. She got up, wrapped herself in her heaviest cloak, and went to the window. The courtyard was 3 feet deep in snow and still falling. White and grey, and completely still, the torches at the gates burning hazy through the storm. She had seen winter in the Ashvane holding, but that was pine forest winter, cold and clean. This was something older, Norse winter, biblical winter, the kind that made you understand why the old peoples had believed in frost giants. "Can't sleep?" She spun. He was in the doorway of the corridor. She had left her door open, as the east wing was warm, dressed in plain clothes, a candle in his hand, dark hair loose. He looked like himself, and nothing else. Just a man. Just colder. "I heard the snow change," she said. Which was true. The sound of snowfall had a texture. He came to stand at the other side of the window. They looked out at the white courtyard together. The candle made a small bubble of gold light around them. "How much longer is winter?" she said. Not quite a question. 3 months, usually. He paused. "Your first season ends in 6 weeks." She had known. She had been knowing quietly, in the background of every day for 2 weeks. The arrangement was 1 season. She had not thought about what came after it. "Maren told me," she said. "What did she tell you?" She looked at him. He was looking at the snow. His profile in the candlelight was very clean. Jaw, throat, the line of his shoulder. She had spent months learning to look at him sideways, in peripheral vision, carefully. She was looking at him directly now, and he was letting her. "She told me you know," Solveig said, "about the bond." A beat of silence. "Yes," he said. When did you know? The courtyard, he said. The first day? She absorbed this. You've known since the first day. Yes. And the arrangement? Was real, he said. The court function requirement was real. Everything I offered was real. He paused. But also, yes, I wanted time. He turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of it. Not demanding, not claiming, just looking, with a directness that had nowhere to hide. I could not take a mate who did not choose it freely. You could have, she said. Technically. By law to die. I know. But you didn't. No. She looked at him for a long time. The snow fell outside, filling the world with white. What do you want? She said. The simplest version of the question. You, he said. Equally simple. If you want it. She thought about her father's hold, small and in debt, and smelling of pine. She thought about her life before this, careful, invisible, adequate. She thought about 6 weeks from now, leaving this library, this keep, this window. She thought about the boundary ritual at dawn, his voice repeating the answering phrase, quiet, resonant, the thing she had felt in her sternum. I want it, she said. He was very still for a moment. Then he raised his hand and touched her face, just her cheekbone, one finger, barely a touch, the most restrained gesture she had ever seen from a person who was visibly feeling something significant. His gray-black eyes were changing. She watched it happen, the color deepening, warming, amber bleeding into the gray from the center, the mate bond activating for the first time. She had read about this. She had not expected it to look like that, like fire finding tinder, like a light coming on in a room that had been dark for a very long time. Gold, she breathed. Yes, he said. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. They stood in the window with the winter falling around them, and the gold in his eyes bright, and she thought, This is what the warmth under the ice was for. He did not change immediately. This was important to understand. He did not become someone else. He did not become soft, or unguarded, or suddenly verbose. He was still Calder Vordrek. Still the iron-still Alpha King who moved through the world like weather, who spoke in complete silences, who commanded without raising his voice. But the morning after the window, she came down to the great hall to find that her usual place at the table had been moved, not to the high table, but to the seat beside him. He was already seated, reading a letter. He did not look up. He did not say anything. He simply moved a bowl of porridge 3 inches to the right to make space. She sat down. She ate her breakfast. He read his letter. The entire hall noticed, and very carefully did not react. Wolf walked past and inhaled slightly, caught the scent change that neither of them had announced, and his eyes crinkled at the corners and the closest thing to open delight she had ever seen on his face. He said nothing. He walked on. The changes were all like this. Not announcements. Actions. The way a heavier cloak appeared on her peg after the first time he saw her come in from the cold. The way she now automatically received copies of the council papers, without discussion. The way, in the library at night, he had begun to read passages aloud that he thought she might find interesting, not asking for response, just sharing them, the way you shared things with someone who was yours. She found all of this, to her surprise, more moving than words would have been. Marin said, Alpha men show love through problem-solving and logistics. Receive it that way, and you will be happy. Solveig said, That's not the whole story. Maren smiled. No, but it's where it starts. It was true that he did not say the things. He did not say, "You are beautiful," or "I missed you," or any of the words that the romance tales were built from. But he came to find her when she was in the still room with Maren. He stood in the doorway and did not come in and did not say anything, just stood there long enough to know she was there, and then left. And she understood this, in the marrow, as its own kind of sentence. He found her on the battlements one evening, watching the northern lights ripple above the snow, green and violet and gold, vast and slow. He stood beside her without speaking. After a long time, he took off his outer cloak and settled it around her shoulders without comment, leaving him in only his tunic in the cold. "You'll freeze," she said. "I won't. You're not actually immune to cold." "Relatively immune." A pause. "Stop arguing." She pulled the cloak tighter, which was enormous on her and smelled of pine and lightning and him, and she did not argue. The lights moved above them, cosmic and indifferent, and she stood under his cloak with his warmth still in it, and felt with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The thing that Solveig remembered most, in the years after, was not the courtyard in the sleet, though she loved that memory. It was not the boundary ritual, or the stable, or the library, or the window. It was an afternoon in late spring, the first spring after the winter that changed everything. She was in the map room. Her map room now. She had colonized a corner of it with policy documents and trade correspondence and her own annotations on the navigation charts. And Calder was at the central table, doing whatever it was he did that required 3 simultaneous documents, and a quill in his hand, and absolute concentration. A younger courtier had come in with a question about the arrangement, about her, specifically, about what she was, and what her role was, and whether it was formal. Calder looked up from his documents with the particular quality of stillness that meant he was about to say something short that would be remembered for a long time. "She is my mate," he said. Flat, simple, total. Then he went back to his documents. The courtier left. Solveig went on reviewing her trade correspondence. "You could have told him that months ago," she said. "You hadn't chosen it months ago," he said. "I had, actually. You were the one who took time." The scratch of his quill stopped. She looked up. He was looking at her with the gold already warm in his eyes. Easier now, faster, gold at the center threading through the gray-black like dawn coming. "You're arguing again," he said. "I'm correct again." He set down his quill. He pushed his chair back. He crossed the room with the particular unhurried certainty of a man who knows exactly where he is going, and he put his hands on her face, both of them this time, careful and large and warm, and kissed her in a way that was not understated at all. She kissed him back. Outside, the spring was coming in from the sea, green and salt-smelling, running under the last of the snow. Somewhere in the keep, Wolf was telling Maren, with great satisfaction, that he had known from the courtyard. Maren was saying she had known before that. They were both right, in the way that the people who love the people in the story are always, frustratingly, impossibly, right. In the high room of Vordheim Keep, the Alpha King's eyes were gold. And the scent that had vanished from nothing, because she had never truly gone, only waited, filled the room like the first morning of a new season. Like frost, like cedar, like something warm underneath. Like home.